Hello travelers, Boardman21 here, and today got a build for you. It's going to be the Forge Strike Forge Guard, and with this build you're going to have a ranged melee attack, which will be Forge Strike. You'll be able to do great damage from afar. You can also lunge in and use it right on top of enemies, and it will also have detonating ground, so you get a secondary hit about a second later that will also do really good damage. Now this build is not going to be the hardest hitting skill in the Sentinel's arsenal. It's also not going to be the tankiest build that you can play, but it is empowered viable. You can play it. We were streaming it for a few hours just yesterday, and we had maybe 1 or 2 deaths in the entire playthrough of it, completing many echoes, taking on Orbis a couple of times. And it's very viable. There's also a lot of ways you can play it. You can do dual wielding with axes and swords, or dual swords, dual axes. You can do two-handed sword, two-handed axe, two-handed mace with a blunt weapon. There are plenty of choices for what you can do with it. It's a really high variety build, but overall it's just a way to play Forge Strike in a fun way. If it's a skill that you haven't tried out yet, it is not using the melee minion portion of it, so it's just a melee attack. No different than, say, using Rive, or using Vengeance, or erasing Strike. Alright, let's go ahead and get into the skills, the interactions, and just how it all works. For skills, I'm running Forge Strike, Sigils of Home, Lunge, Smite, and Ring of Shields. For Forge Strike, we have this set up with lots of fire damage, detonating ground, making it targetable, and also getting rid of the forged weapons, and instead getting a lot of base crit chance along with a crit multi as well. So we've got 3 points in Iron Bound for that base crit and crit multi, 1 point in Singular Craft, which gives it even more base crit chance, but you can no longer summon the forged weapons, and then 1 point in Spear Forge, which gives you a 100% increased critical strike multiplier, reduces the area a little bit, and converts it to a spear-looking attack. Then we got 2 points in Heavy Strike for more damage, 2 points in Rending Descent, so we apply Armor Shred on our hits, 1 point in Range Strike, allows us to cast it at the target for an increased mana cost. However, the quality of life on this is that you can attack enemies from range, which makes defeating things like Orbis much easier. We also got 1 point in Goliath Strike, so that we do more hit damage against rares and bosses, 3 points in Strike Smash for increased area, 5 points in Temper for that 50 more base fire damage, which is huge, and then 1 point in Detonating Ground, which 1 second after your attack, or 1.5 seconds after your attack, will deal about half the normal damage of your hits. So it's like 50% more damage, but it's a second later and you can kite enemies into it, so it's really useful. For Sigils of Hope, we're using this for a lot of added melee damage, increased damage, and added fire damage. So we've got 5 points in Empowering Sigils, so that we get 30% increased damage per active sigil, 3 points in Decree of Flame, so we're getting a total of 7 added fire damage per sigil, 1 point in Last Wish, so there's a 6% chance on kill that we'll have one summoned for us automatically, 1 point in Word of Alacrity, and then 5 points in Word of Power, so that we have 150% increased global melee damage for 3 seconds when we cast one, which is a lot of extra damage. 2 points in Iron Sigils for some armor, and 3 points in Enduring Hope to increase their duration. For Lunge, we got 20 points here. It's set up the normal way. I say that, this is probably the last build that we'll do that's considered the normal way since Lunge is changing. But we've got 4 points into the fray, 1 point Deadly Aim, 3 points Tactician, 4 points Forge On, 1 point Unstoppable, 1 point in Initiative, 5 points in Adventurous Charge, and 1 point in Brigade, which is kind of pointless, no dex on the build, but really nowhere else you're going to put the point anyway. You can move it anywhere that you want. For Smite, we're using this for attack speed boost and for added fire damage. We've got 4 points in Holy Wave, 5 points in Righteous Fury, 5 points in Righteous Flurry, 5 points in Panacea, and 1 point in Desperate Measures. These last points you don't need to have there, you can put them anywhere that you want, but for us the main thing you want is the 5 points in both the Flurry and the Fury. Alright, for Ring of Shields, our last skill, we're using this for added fire damage as well as increased melee fire damage and some extra armor. We've got 3 points in Banding, 1 point in Molten Shields, 5 points in Touched by Fire, 3 points in Wreathed in Flame, 2 points in Enduring Defense, 1 point in Reinforcement, 2 points in Healing Shields, and 3 points in Phalanx. For passives, I've got 20 points in the base Sentinel class with 4 points in Overwhelm, 6 points in Juggernaut, 5 points in Armor Clad, 5 points in Time and Faith. Now, if you decide to go dual wielding instead of a two-hander and you want to use an axe and sword, you're going to have to put the 1 point in Gladiator to dual wield, and then I also recommend the 5 points in Blade Master for the 60% increase in attack speed that you would get between a sword and an axe. However, attack speed isn't a huge thing for this build, as you're not attacking super fast. The faster you attack, the faster you're going to run out of mana. It's not super important, so don't really worry about it. A two-hander is just fine. We got 13 points in the Void Knight with 5 points in Abyssal Endurance and 8 points in World Eater so that we can leech a lot of the damage that we do. For Paladin, we got 15 points to unlock the Sigils of Hope. We got 7 points in Conviction and 8 points in Defiance. And then for the Forge Guard, our Master class, we have 65 points. We've got 8 points in Weapons Master, 7 points in Battle Hardened, 10 points in Fresh from the Forge, 5 points in Champion of the Forge, 6 points in Crushing Blows, and I should mention, a lot of people don't like the passives that give you like added damage every 3 seconds. However, for this one, you're usually only attacking every few seconds, maybe twice in the 3-second period, so every other attack is going to get that boost, which is going to help you do a lot more damage. 6 points in Might, 8 points in Duelist, 6 points in Lethal Strikes, 8 points in Molded by the Forge, and 1 point in Avatar of War. Alright, for idols, items, blessings, uniques, there are no uniques in this build. For idols, there's a couple of different ones you can go for. I went with the melee fire penetration, which will really boost your damage. It can also give you increased the Sigils of Hope duration. For 1x3s, you can get chance to shred armor on fire hits, which is what we're doing. You can get critical strike chance or dual hybrid health if you want on a 1x2. 1x1 can give you any resistance that you're missing. The 1x3 horizontal can give increased armor. For items, like I said, we're wearing a two-handed sword in this build. Basically, you want to do added melee fire damage. You want the melee critical strike chance. You have to have some added melee critical strike chance, whether it be as the implicit or on the weapon itself. Make sure to get some. You want between 5 and 10%. The closer you get to 10%, the more you'll crit. With Lunge, you'll crit 100% of the time. However, if you don't have Lunge, you need about 13 to 15% base critical strike chance to have a very high chance. For the rest of the weapons, I'm just going to hover over all of them really quickly. Nothing super special. Basically, you want to build into mana regen and defense. And then just on the weapon, you want that fire damage. For blessings, nothing special here. There are some that are best in slot. For instance, the ones that you're really going to want at the end is the fire resistance shred on hit, which you can get from the Spirits of Fire. That's going to be the best one that you can get there, because it's really going to increase your damage against bosses after a few hits and you've started to shred off all their fire resist. You can do up to 75% more damage if you shred 75% of it. And like always, this build planner will be in the description below as well as in the written guide. Alright, let's move on to the character sheet. For the character sheet, as you can see, we have just over 2100 health. We don't have all capped resistances. There's still a lot of room on our gear to improve. You can definitely cap all of them if you spend the time and find all of the good gear that you need to do so. We got about 38% armor. This goes up a ton when you lunge and when the Ring of Shields heals you, and when you have your sigils out. You can easily get above 50% damage reduction through armor. On top of that, for damage types, you can see we have about 135% melee, but don't forget, when we cast a Sigil of Hope, you can see how that boom, that goes way up, and we start to get more, especially as you get more and more sigils. We're also adding in the fire damage. When you lunge, you're going to get 100% increased armor, but you also get all of that crit chance, which is going to boost our melee up to just about 100%. And then, of course, there's base crit chance, which isn't calculated inside of the Forge Strike tree itself. And then for defense, you can see we have almost capped endurance, and we do have our critical strike avoidance capped. Alright, so for how to play this build in skill rotation, I like to put Lunge and Ring of Shields both on autocast. And then for more damage, obviously cast your sigils out. And then you can use Smite to get mana back. You can also just use Forge Strike and do some massive damage. Here you can see that we are easily hitting for almost 100k damage on the training dummy. And if you wait a full 3 seconds, get yourself some really big hits. Now, there's one thing you should remember. Now, while we do get 40 added melee, physical, and fire damage every 3 seconds on our next melee attack, Lunge counts as a melee attack. So you have to be careful. If you have that on autocast, it will use that, and then you would have to wait 3 seconds to have it again. And because Lunge only has a 2.3 second cooldown, you can go faster than that cooldown, which means if you keep lunging every time it comes off cooldown, there's a good chance you're going to be able to use the Forge Strike on your very next attack, but it takes some really good timing. For the most part, you might just want to take Lunge off autocast, especially in like Orbis fights, so that you can control that and do the extra damage when you need to, as adding that 40 physical and fire to Lunge isn't going to make the biggest difference. It does way better if you keep it on Forge Strike, which we can do here. You'll notice I can take that off, we get our sigils up, and then we make sure to do our attack. We won't crit as much, but you can see we can do the 100k damage once we do that. Alright, that's going to be it for this build guide. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Like I said, Forge Strike is a really underused skill. There are a lot of skills like it. Erasing Strike does more damage than it and is pretty comparable. Does a little bit bigger AoE. Some things, Forge Strike may be changing in the future. Maybe it'll get a rework at some point. It wasn't in the list of things to change in the upcoming 8.3 patch, but we'll see what happens to it in the future. If it's a skill that you've tried and you really liked it and you want to have an empowered, viable version of it, definitely give this build a try. Alright guys, that's going to be it from me. As always, stay safe, travelers, and enjoy some gameplay.